All right, turning now to the latest news overseas. MS Now has learned that President Trump has been shown potential plans for action in Iran amid an intense crackdown on protesters in that country. Those options include possible military strikes. Here's what he said just on Air Force One earlier tonight.
Iran said that they would consider military and commercial bases as legitimate targets if you struck. Are you concerned about?
If they do that, we'll consider things targets they wouldn't believe. If they do that, we will hit them at levels that they've never been hit before. They won't even believe it.
Do you think
I have options that are so strong. So I mean, if they did that, it'll be met with a very, very powerful force.
In the meantime, the protests across Iran are growing louder and more intense and more defiant by the day. An economic collapse certainly triggered these protests, but they have now expanded beyond just economics to include political and social rights. And the Iranian government has responded with deadly crackdowns amid widespread internet blackouts. According to the U.S.-based human rights activist news agency, more than 500 people have been killed, with the real toll likely higher. Iran has seen major protests before in 2018, 2019, and of course the huge 2022 uprisings after the killing of Mahsa Jina Amini, who died in custody for improper covering. But this moment feels different. Trump, as we mentioned, is publicly weighing options, using locked and loaded terminology, and suddenly framing himself, along with many other Republicans, as well as the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as defenders of the Iranian people's freedom. Joining us now is Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute. Trita, it's good to have you with us. So information out of Iran has been limited because of the internet shutdown. We don't have a clear sense of what is happening on a day-to-day basis, but we know that tens of thousands, if not more, of Iranians across the country have taken to the city in unprecedented levels. It is happening in almost every province of the country. I think that in of itself speaks a lot. There are some glimpses of what's happening on the ground there, like this video earlier this week of a makeshift morgue in Tehran showing body bags of dead protesters and families trying to identify their loved ones. What else has been coming through that gives us a sense of just the horrors of what's happening on the ground?
Good to be with you. I mean, I just spoke to someone who had managed to get in touch with someone inside of Iran. It's become a little bit easier today, next to impossible yesterday and the day before because of the complete shutdown. And the testimonies are terrifying in terms of the level of violence that appears to have been used. At the same time, the protests last night and the night before were smaller than what it had been, what is our Thursday evening, which is not necessarily a sign that the protests are dying down. These things have a rhythm of their own. They can slow down and pick up pace again, and I would suspect that by next Friday, they may actually go higher than they were past Friday, but it also depends, of course, if Trump attacks Iran or not, which will be a major wild card in all of this. These protests have been widespread, as you mentioned, but they're also very, very different. Almost all of them are taking place at night, except for in the beginning when there were actually shopkeepers and traders that were doing the protest. This is now a very different type of a protest. The level of violence, both from the regime, but also from some elements in the protest, are also very different from what we've seen before. Images are coming out with police officers being turned on fire, etc. So this is really looking very, very different. This is not the type of protests that we saw just 3 years ago, demanding the fall of the regime, as well as more freedom for women. This is looking very different, and of course the regime's response has been absolutely brutal by all indications thus far.
Are there any signs of cracks in this regime?
I've not seen anything yet. In fact, some signs go in the opposite direction. So, for instance, the head of the army, which usually, I mean, traditionally has stayed out of these things, and even when they have been pushed to actually be used against protesters, they have refused. But this time around, the head of the army said that they're ready to act. And it is, I think, a clear sign because they do see the country as a whole being under threat as well, mindful of the threats coming from Israel, mindful of the threats coming from the Trump administration, mindful of the fact that Israeli media is openly talking about that they have Mossad agents inside of the country as part of the protest, etc. Mike Pompeo has been tweeting the same thing. All of these things have created a very different situation. And for the first time, we're seeing that the head of the army is making a statement of this kind. And we've not seen any signs of at least any senior people from the regime defecting or moving in that direction.
What do you think are the dangers of sticking with the status quo vis-a-vis American policy towards Iran versus what Donald Trump is indicating, that he is willing to take the side of protesters and push for regime change?
No, I don't think the status quo in any way, shape, or form was stable or sustainable. I mean, part of the reason why we have these escalating threats, which incidentally happened before the protests, Netanyahu came to Washington on December 29th and was pushing for the U.S. to join in Israel in attacking Iran. So the status quo was never going to last anyways. The question, of course, is what happens if the Trump administration takes military action? The signs and the signaling from the Iranian government here is much harsher than I think we have seen before. They've even come out and said that they might take preemptive military action if they see that the indications of an attack are significant. Everyone I've spoken to believe that there's a very high likelihood that there will be attacks on U.S. bases. In the past, we have seen that the Iranians have not done this. Instead, they have opted for very symbolic retaliation in coordination with the U.S. to make sure that the U.S. bases are emptied, et cetera, no casualties. But that is also a position that is highly criticized inside of the Iranian regime because it has not led to increased security for them. I mean, mindful of the fact that they're in this situation again now. So there's a likelihood that they are going to actually make true on some of their threats that they issued before, and particularly mindful of the fact that they seem to believe that they're faced with an existential situation right now and they don't have any exits. In that scenario, there's a much higher likelihood that they actually will strike. And that would be a very, very different scenario than anything we have seen so far when it comes to the U.S. Or the Trump administration using military force against Iran.
Trita, can you help me understand what actually triggered these protests this time around? They do seem to be, you said in some ways they're very similar, in some ways they're different. They do seem at least a lot bigger than what we've gotten accustomed to. What actually triggered this massive outpouring of public dissent?
It started with a collapse of the currency, partly based on some reforms that they were trying to push through, but also because of attacks against the currency. Because of U.S. financial sanctions, the Iranian government doesn't have access to a large amount of its funds that are based in foreign banks, so it actually cannot really defend the currency. And this immediately impacts, of course, traders that are, deeply impacted by these rapid volatility of the currency and, of course, its collapse. So that's how it started, but very quickly it morphed into something else, which is a sign of the tremendous anger and frustration that exists inside of society. I've frankly never seen it this angry. People have always been angry at this regime. This is not a popular regime in any way, shape, or form, but the level of anger is just completely different now than I've seen ever before.
Trita Parsi, thank you so much for joining us tonight and for helping us understand a situation that so many Americans just do not have visibility into, and for bringing that context to us. We appreciate you.